to talk about. One is just trying to get you right for spring. And the idea here is just where are we at compared to previous years? How are you doing in your hives? This is a dialogue between all of us. I wanted to start with the notion that the temperatures this year are a little bit different than last year. And we've had this theme going in our club about what happens between winter and now when you get started, and what are the bees doing inside the box. So you have to think about the body temperature of the bee and when they could be active. 57 degrees is when they start to cluster for warmth in the hive in the fall. And obviously 57 degrees is when they could start to break and be really active in the spring. The body temps below 50 degrees for the physical bee creates an issue for them. They start to get too cold to operate. And if they're at 45 degrees, they can't fly. They become inoperable. If they fly out of the hive and land on the snow and chill to 45 degrees, they won't come back. So you have to keep that in mind and think about flying activity is somewhere between 50 to 110 degrees. What's the temp out there right now today?
44.
44. So it depends also on the race of bees that you have. Some bees will get up and be active at colder temperatures just because of the nature of what they are. So for example, I had Italian bees in my first run of bees. They wouldn't fly till it was 50 degrees. When I switched to Carniolian bees, those girls were out working at 45 and below. They were amazing. So the ambient temperature of 64 degrees or higher, and the bees inside the hive don't cluster. At 57 degrees, they become operational. At 48 degrees inside the hive, they say that the bees start to cluster themselves, right? So they can move around inside the hive somewhat. At 44 degrees, and this is what I'm talking about, why the temperature is important today, they can go out and make a flight. They are warm enough from being inside the cluster, which by the way is 95 degrees in the center, that they can go out, make a flight, do their business, and then come back. So the whole winter time they're in their hive, holding in there, waiting for that day to be 44 degrees before they can go out and make cleansing flights. And I think what you'll see, and we've observed this pattern, is even if it's 45 degrees, they'll be in the hive, they'll be in the hive, they'll be in the hive, and all of a sudden something happens, whether the sun hits it right or does whatever, but you'll see this mass exodus. It almost looks like a swarm. And they all come out and do their cleansing flights. And for 15, 20 minutes, you have bees all over the place, and they're orienting, and they're doing whatever, and then they all go back in. So if you see this behavior now, understand that's where they're at. They're getting to the point now where they can go out and do their cleansing flights. So what I did, yeah.
What do they do during a cleansing flight?
They go out. They go out and fly for the first time. They may go and orient to the sun. Some of these bees have emerged over the winter time inside the cluster. They haven't been outside yet. So you'll see them come out and they'll be circling the hive. They'll obviously go to the bathroom, right? They don't go to the bathroom inside the hive. So you'll see yellow spots all over the place. And if we had 2 warm days back in the beginning of March. One of them was like 60 something. And there was snow all over the ground. If you've been out to your hive and you saw yellow spots all over the place, that's what that was. If you were out there when they were really active, it would have felt like it was raining. So, but that's what they're doing. They're getting rid of their excrement, and they're also flying and orienting to the sun. They're looking at the surroundings. They're getting their bearings to the world. So this is interesting because we want to know when the swarm is going to occur, right? And leading up to swarm, you're looking at the temperature profiles. What I did was I went through January, February, and March for 2013 and 2014 to compare last year to this year, so you have a perspective. How many of you were beekeepers last year?
At this time?
At this time? Probably half the room. Okay. Now, I want you to note on this, the important thing on this slide are these two bars, the top one and the light blue one. And some of them they show up and some of them they don't, but you'll get the general gist. The orange one is the high temperature average. The blue one is the low temperature average. This is 2014, this is 2013. So just without diving into the data, what do you see? You see that they're kind of half above, I'm looking at the yellow line, and half below. And it looks the same here, although you have this big run of above right here in January last year, which is really unusual, right? There was a full period here where they were almost at 50 degrees and they would have been active last year. This year, not so much. They have this little one here. But here's the other thing to note. This is 0 degrees, that bar, that gray one right along the bottom there. If you look at the low temperatures, the lows this year were lower than they were last year on average. In other words, it was colder, and I don't think we all need evidence of that, given what we just went through for the winter. So here's January, kind of half above, half below, the belows are deeper. Here's February. Most of it was below the average. You see a blip above here and there. And the lows, again, are pretty low. You got this one down here at 0, and, you know. What's funny is if you look at between the bars and where they lie, this one was kind of pretty close between those bars. This one you could see had this big trough right here. So again, we're colder in January. Hang on to these notions because I'm going to explain to you why that makes a difference. March was really up and down, and now we're tailing off with a higher up, right? So the projections here are what they're supposed to be for the end of March. So it looked relatively normal last year, and here again it's a little bit below, colder. Here's the interesting piece. Average temperature, Jan to March, 2013, 41.8. Average temp, Jan to March this year, 37.3. Remember we talked about when they can and can't operate. 45 degrees, 34 days they had that opportunity in 2014, 13 I mean, and 24 days in 2014. So that means this year they've had 10 days less to operate inside the hive. The days above 45 degrees, where they could have actually left the hive and done something, of those days, 5 of them, it was raining outside. Now, I don't know if it was raining all day, I don't know if it was raining in the morning or the evening, but it rained. So if it rained in the middle of the day when it was at that 45-degree window, maybe they were or were not operational. So if we look at this pattern of 13 versus 14, we know this year that they're behind where they were last year. So if you think about last year, when did you do your spring activities? Add new boxes, do your switches, all that thing. You should be about a week, maybe almost 2 weeks behind this year, right? Okay. So it's really helpful as a beekeeper to keep these notes. You could go, I went to AccuWeather.com and got it, right? You could keep your own journal, you can go back and look historically at other places. I don't know where AccuWeather bases their center. It could be out of Philadelphia, it could be out of New York, it's not here where you live, right? But I think it's closer. Now, Barbara, we were having a conversation earlier this week with Barbara Hill. She lives in Ringgoes. I live in Ringgoes. Barbara lives on the Saralyn Mountain. I live down in the valley. Her temperatures average about 4 or 5 degrees colder from me, and we live 5 miles apart. So it's all about where you live relative to these numbers. So I think I'm going to turn this one over to Bob. He's going to talk about the ultimate goal is for us to keep our bees in the box for spring, for the nectar flow. And you want to do swarm prevention, right? And we're going to go over a couple methods that you should be thinking about so when that box grows out of control, you're going to thwart the swarm and keep them from flying away on you. And open the brood box, I added slotted rock in there too, so you know.
Okay. Okay, so we've talked about this at the last meeting. We're going to talk a little bit more about it today, but I mean, there's a lot of different methods of swarm prevention, and we're only gonna mention 5 of them. There's a lot more than this. But first one is hive reversal. We talked about that last time. So if you go into your hive and you find that all your bees are up in that upper box, and the bottom box is empty, what you wanna do is take the bottom empty box, put the full box on the bottom, and put the empty box on the top.
When you do that, do you want to put a queen excluder between the two and three?
I don't use queen excluders, so I can't tell you. I wouldn't. I guess you can if you're, gonna put some empty honey supers on it eventually, and you don't want the queen up there laying in them.
Really, the queen excluder is used as a tool to keep them out of the honey chamber. So, and the queen excluder is gonna restrict the bees from moving through. So I don't know that you would use a queen excluder here.
Okay, so what we talked about, this is what I just said. All the broods up in the top, you put them on the bottom, you put the empty on the top. What you don't want to do is, if you've got some brood in that bottom box, is do your hive reversal, because what you're doing is you're basically splitting up the brood nest, right? So you want to make sure that all of your brood is up in that top box. The traditional wisdom has been that this should always be done around the dandelion bloom, okay? Some people do it earlier. I think it's up to you. But what we were told when we first started beekeeping was you reverse the boxes at the dandelion bloom. I know a lot of people that have already reversed their boxes this year. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. It's whatever you want to do. But if you want to try it at the dandelion bloom first.
What if you have a situation down there, the bottom left corner, where do you have that situation? You just wait out a little while and then switch, or?
So what you see here is this is the honey dome up here. So this is actually brood. That's correct, right, Kevin? So what this is showing is you've got your brood here, and you've got a honey dome at the top. So we're going to talk about what you want to do in that case. It's called checkerboarding. I'm going to get to that. That's another method of swarm prevention. Okay, if your bees are already up in the top, you don't have to worry about them working up into the next box, because there's not a honey dome in there that's going to prevent the queen from going up and laying and prevent the bees from storing nectar up there. So what you want to do is break up that dome, and we'll talk about that.
But before you go there, in the case of the one on the left, just leave it be. I know bees build up, but the conversation is they'll fill the brood back down. And in combination with the checkerboard, you could do it.
I'm brand new, so I know nothing. So my questions might sound a little...
I've been doing this for 5 years, and I don't know much more.
can you, like, if you have the situation that on the bottom left where you have the broods kind of split between the two large boxes,
Yes.
could you possibly add a third box on top then, that would then, provide the space for bees, because, I recall them saying that bees want to move up. So then
yes.
if you put a third box, then would that help you solve your problem?
If it was just a third box of empty comb, no, it wouldn't, because you have this honey dome that the queen's not going to cross and lay, so she's going to start laying back down into these boxes. And eventually, when she fills it up to the bottom, the bees are going to be out foraging for nectar. They're going to start backfilling the brood nest. And once they start backfilling the brood nest, that's one of the triggers for swarming. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to open up, and we'll talk about this, open up the honey dome to allow the brood nest to expand overhead, and also provide for the bees to store nectar overhead so that they're not filling the brood nest, backfilling the brood nest. It'll make more sense in a second.
What is a honey dome?
So honey dome is basically a band of honey, so you've got excess honey at the end of the winter that's at the top of your brood nest. Okay, all the way across solid, whether it's full frames or whether it's just a solid band. The queen is reluctant to move across that honey. I'm not saying she never does.
So even the center frames will have honey on the top.
Yes, it'll be completely full, all the way across. So again, it could be just the tops of the frames, or it could be a second box that's just full of honey.
You'll literally have comb, 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 and on both sides will be honey stored in all the cells, and it'll be capped off with wax. Or it'll be open, but there's no place for the queen to put an egg in any of the cells because it's full of nectar and or ripening honey and or cured honey that's been capped.
And she just won't go back down. So why would she just go back down?
She will. So
She will.
To be clear, that's what I was just explaining. So if she's not gonna lay, if she doesn't wanna cross the honey dome, she's gonna start laying downward. Okay, when she gets down here, she's not gonna have any more room to lay. So what's gonna happen is, she's gonna stop laying because there's no room, and the bees that are gathering nectar, because there's no place to store it overhead, they're gonna start storing it in the brood nest. And when they stop backfilling the brood nest and the brood nest starts shrinking, that's gonna initiate swarming. That's one of the causes of swarming, is this backfilling of the brood nest with nectar. And to be clear, what's going on right now is that brood nest is expanding. Okay, what's the colony trying to do right now? It's trying to swarm.
It's trying to reproduce.
That's what the bees do. A healthy hive coming out of winter wants to build up enough bees and enough stores so that it can swarm. So that half the bees can leave with half the honey, and both hives will be strong enough to survive. So what you've got here is you've got the brood nest expanding, and you've got the foragers wanting to bring in nectar as the nectar flow starts.
And to be specific, because we have two folks in the audience, stores means reserves of honey and or nectar that they're gonna use for carbohydrate and fuel, and reserves of pollen, which is their protein. So the pollen is what they feed to the young and what they do to build new bees. And if you think about what's going on, and this is why we went to the temperature thing first, that queen coming out of winter, getting prepared for the nectar flow, which is coming in the spring, they know this, is gonna build two workforces. That's her objective. One, to sustain the colony when the swarm leaves, and one, to be a colony when the colony leaves and goes and establishes in a tree or wherever it's supposed to be in nature. So she's working right now, and the whole colony has one motivation right now. They wanna get two clusters of bees, one that's gonna fly off and one that's gonna remain. If they get to the point where they have enough to sustain one colony and the swarm leaves and this colony dies, they've missed their objective. So they're working hard right now to do everything they can to fill the cavity that they have available to them so that they can issue a swarm. At some point, they'll get to a breaking point where they realize they're either gonna make it or they're not. If they don't make it, based on what's going on, they'll retreat a little bit and they'll get prepared to do it again in the summer or whenever they can do it, but they're gonna back off. But right now, 100%, they're working towards productive or reproductive situation, which is how do bees reproduce in nature? They issue a swarm, right?
Your pictures always show two deep boxes. Is that what you always do, or could you have a third box right from the beginning that might leave a box that's empty of the brood?
Yes, so there are a lot of people that will winter over in 3 deeps, okay? So basically, they've got the brood nest in the bottom 2, and honey in the top one, or a little bit more honey in that second box. But whether you, I guess, what I've always been told as a beekeeper is, in this climate, the minimum is 2 deeps. Having said that, I know people that winter in 1 deep, right? But there is a group of people that winter in 3 deeps. And the idea is that at the end of the winter, there'll still be some stores available, and they'll get off to a good start in the spring. A lot of times that top box has been called a food box in years past for people that wintered in 3 deeps. So yes, you can. If you have a colony that's that strong going into the winter, that's great. As long as it's unparasitized, that's a great situation to have. Big cluster, plenty of stores. I think you're set for the winter. So yes, people do go to 3 deeps.
So that's what I've got, and I've checked and my bees are flying, they're coming back full of pollen.
Yeah.
So that means I've got a queen that's laying eggs.
She's going to town.
And I've been told that I gotta wait about another week or so and take boxes 1 and 3 and swap.
Yes. Again, assuming that they're all on the top
Assuming
two.
everybody's up top. That's
Yes.
what I gotta go in, find out that everybody's up top, and then just swap 1 and 3.
So yes, that's one way to do it. I'm gonna give you another
Yes,
alternative.
I'm interested.
okay?
I'm sorry, do you
Don't
number
be sorry,
your,
yes, that's, everybody asks.
do you like number or code your boxes somehow so you remember? Because I'm thinking, I'm not gonna remember what box is where, even with just one. And I'm thinking then you have multiples. Do you have some kind of coding system so you know what box is going where and when you change those boxes?
I don't, does anyone else, does anybody want to chime in? And again, I would encourage, I see a lot of experienced beekeepers in the room, chime into this conversation. I don't have all the answers, neither does Kevin, so.
I would answer that, it's fine to number your boxes so you can remember. After a while, you know, it becomes routine and it will come clear to you after you do it a few times. But number them, 1, 2, 3, sure. Keep notes, that's fine.
That's the key, is keep notes, right? You should be keeping notes on your particular hive. Some people name their hives, literally. This one's Shirley, that one's Joan, that one's Maria. And they talk about Maria today did this, or however they do it.
Okay.
Right? And you should always keep scrupulous notes so you could backtrack where you've been. You're gonna hear me say later, if you came out with a less than ideal situation, you wanna go back and look at what you did and don't do that again. You know, and the only way you could figure out how to not do that again is to have notes of what you've done. So, Peter, you wanna make a comment?
I was going to say notes,
Notes,
but it's largely based on observation.
yeah.
You cannot, in my experience, you really shouldn't be mechanical about it. Because some bees may look like this, the next time over,
Yeah.
it's totally different.
Yeah.
It's really important to let the bees guide you about what you should be doing. Sometimes you don't need to rotate, especially if
That's a great point.
especially if you have 3.
Yeah.
I would say I run 3 or 4, believe it or not. But I mean, sometimes I don't have to do the swap at all. They're happy in their huge space.
Yes.
Just one more thing, you can make your notes right on the hive. Like if you have a magic marker, or if you have a queen marker, that's what I do. So, you know, I just mark what I saw, date, then next time you come back there, it's a lot easier.
So especially the commercial guys
Yeah,
are marking on the hives. There's a video out on the internet from Michael Palmer. He uses duct tape. He puts duct tape on it, he writes with a permanent marker, and he's got his own little shorthand. So he knows, what he did last time he was here, what queen is in there, the whole bit. So yeah, if it would help you to mark them, yes, go ahead and do it.
They literally write on the top of the hive cover, and that's what Joe was saying, in case you didn't hear. They literally write on the hive itself what's going on. Charlie does that all the time, so.
Also, colored thumbtacks is a good clue.
Yes.
You've got to remember what your colors.
Yes, I gotta remember your system.
But once you learn how to, it's really quick. Boom, 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 and they pop off and push back on.
Yeah,
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna add is, I just started last year myself. I don't know how many hives you have. I've recommend having 2, because it allows you to compare and contrast. So one hive starts going south, you can say, oh, this is my healthy hive. You gotta compare to there. And if you're going in every week, I didn't need to take notes, because, it's top of mind, you see what's going on. I think, kind of to Bob's point, once you start getting above a certain number, then it starts getting confusing, but you just got a couple hives, it's not overwhelming, you just go in and see what's going on.
So you make a great point for the new beekeepers. Once the weather warms up, I don't know if it's ever going to warm up this year, but once it does, I would encourage new beekeepers to go in the hive every week. Okay, as you become more experienced, you don't want to be going in there and disrupting them. But as a new beekeeper, you need to see what's going on. Because to Pierre's observation, it's all about observation. You have to look at it, you have to understand what you're seeing. And the only way to do that is by experience. So your first year especially, go in there and see what's happening. Watch that brood nest expand. Watch the nectar being brought in. Watch the pollen. See where they're placing it in the hive. So you understand what they're trying to do. Okay? All right. Again, another way to provide more room, some people use these slatted racks all year round. Some people also say they're snake oil. And the commercial guys will tell you they're unnecessary, and I think they probably are unnecessary. But this is another way to create space under the brood nest. So your slatted rack goes here, you see it's got the empty spaces between, right, to allow things to drop through. And it just provides more room so that as the brood nest is expanding, it can expand down.
Certain beekeepers will tell you that a lot of times without a slatted rack, because the temperature in the spring is coming in through the entrance, the queen will not lay all the way down to the bottom of the frame. But with that, it creates like an insulation chamber that keeps the cold from going up, and you will find that they build the brood all the way down to the bottom, which is why this is an opening the brood chamber concept.
And again, it's creating space, so if you've got a hive that's really chock full of bees, it gives them a place to hang out, right?
What is the depth dimension?
It's about 2.5, 3 inches.
Yeah.
About this big.
People like them in the summertime too, when the box gets really crowded, the bees go down there and they make more space on the face of the comb. They also, the way these are designed by whoever made it, is supposed to help with ventilation of the hive. And so again, some people say they're snake oil, and some people live with them and say they're a very useful tool. So your mileage may vary here.
Okay, checkerboarding, so this is gonna answer some of the questions. If you have that honey dome, okay, so in this case, you've got a 3 deep, you've got your brood nest in these 2 bottom deeps, and you've got a super of honey on the top. So this was a really strong hive going into the winter. It had lots of bees, it had lots of stores, and it still does in the spring. Good sized brood nest and stores overhead. So this is what we mean by a honey dome, okay? There's nowhere for, number 1, for the queen to lay, and number 2, for the bees to store nectar as the flow starts. So what you want to do in this case, and this is, again, don't need to reverse necessarily, depending on what you see in there, is you could checkerboard it, and what that means is you alternate empty frames with these full frames of honey. Right, so this is an empty, that's full, empty, full, empty, full. And then on the one on the top, you do just the opposite. So this is an empty, that's a full. This is an empty, that's a full. This is an empty, that's a full. And what this does is, first of all, it allows the queen to be able to move up and lay in this empty comb. It also provides honey here for the bees, so they'll start using this honey to raise brood. So it'll empty that comb as well, and it also provides storage space overhead for the foragers that are out there that are bringing in nectar. Okay, the one thing about this technique, and this was was a result of some work that Walt Wright in Tennessee did. So Tennessee has a little bit different climate than we have, so a lot of times his bees will come through the winter with excess stores. It may not be applicable for us up here, but if you have this situation, it's something to consider. It has to be done very early. Okay, so I checkerboarded one of the hives up in the mentoring hives on March 15th. It was a warmish day. It probably was 45 to 50, but I just went in there and checkerboarded it because that was a 3 deep hive going into the winter. And it had at least 200 pounds of honey. I could barely lift it. Kevin and I went up and checked it in the beginning of March, and I still could hardly lift it. The thing was just loaded with honey, and it was chock full of bees. So I went in there and I checkerboarded it early.
So you put an additional box on top,
Yes, you basically take this box.
and you put some foundation into the top 2 boxes.
So you're not supposed to use foundation in checkerboarding. Walt will say it doesn't work with foundation. Others will argue it does work with foundation, but you should use drawn comb.
No.
And that's a drawback for people that are beginning
Yeah.
for only a couple of years in, because you don't have drawn comb,
Right.
right? So again, it depends on what you're seeing, what equipment you have, what resources you have.
In the case of this, if you don't have drawn comb and you're into the nectar flow, you can put foundation. And when they have a nectar flow, they'll build that out quickly. And the other thing is, in the second box up there that they've added, they'll burn through that honey in the second box. In the third box that is on the stack, they'll start to move the brood chamber up, and they'll move the honey up above in the fourth box, right? So typically, one of the constructs, when you have a full hive, you're gonna add 2 boxes, is usually the thing. You wanna double the space, is what they tell you.
You almost don't wanna feed them, you want them to use the honey that's in
Well,
there.
if you have a nectar flow, you're not gonna feed them, they wouldn't take it anyway. But if you have excess honey, by all means. And the other thing that happens is, remember, what do they wanna do? They wanna grow 2 populations, one to leave behind and one to cast off. So they're gonna be industrious, and they're gonna store as much as they can, and this gives them something to do also. And they're filling the top with nectar and honey, and not the brood chamber, which is gonna start the swarm. So it'll let you make a bigger colony before they issue the swarm.
So again, that's a point that I didn't mention, so checkerboarding does not involve the brood chamber, okay? You're not touching the brood chamber down here, so you're not checkerboarding in the brood chamber. You're not putting any comb into the brood chamber, you're just putting some alternating combs above the brood chamber.
The hive that you show on the right-hand side, you have a distinct honey dome on the top of the number 2 box. Now, will the queen go from that brood nest up into the number 3 box?
So what will happen here, and Kevin, you can jump in, is as they're raising brood, they're gonna be eating this honey,
They're gonna consume that.
using this honey, right, to raise brood, and then eventually they're gonna access this part here where they can build up. But yes, so again, what they're doing is they're using the honey in order to expand the brood nest, the honey and the pollen.
One of the things you're gonna result in here is you're gonna result in a bigger workforce when you get to the nectar flow, which means they're gonna do more honey storage for you. And I know beekeepers sitting in this room, you want honey. And ideally, you're gonna have the biggest workforce available to you at the time that the nectar flow comes. But it also gives you excess honey to work with when you're in a dearth, and when you're trying to overwinter, they're using their honey instead of you having to feed them, right? Honey is a really valuable resource, and you'd rather have them have their excess stores from the stuff they collected from nature, which has vitamins and minerals and amino acids and all that, versus just sugar and water that you're making in a solution in the fall and giving to them. So the more honey you could get on that box throughout the nectar flow, the better off you'll be for your overwintering pieces too. So if you left this first one alone, they would consume some of the honey, they would go up to the point where they wanted to stop, because they're gonna have honey reserves across the top, but they need to survive, so they're not gonna eat it all. And they'll fill that chamber down, and they'll get to the point where they're gonna swarm and issue, and they'll just be a smaller cluster, they'll be viable. The one on the right, they're gonna be a big cluster, they're gonna have lots of stores, they're gonna issue the swarm. You're in a better situation in that stack. Had a couple of questions across, yeah.
In my bottom super, I have mold, quite a bit of mold.
Okay,
There was a couple of bees down there, the queen was in the second box up. That's
so
the
you
first
have
time I've
mold,
seen
which
mold.
means what?
Moisture.
Mold means moisture.
Right.
So you have to think about where you have your bees. Are they, first off, get them up off the ground if they're
They
not.
are.
And second off, where you're at, there's not enough either sun, or you're in a wet area, you have to find another location. They should be able, in a normal operation, to keep that mold out of there.
That's the first year it's happened in 5
Yeah.
years, so I don't know.
Did you have any kind of an upper entrance, or did you raise the cover up to allow that moisture to go out during the winter?
A little sticking underneath,
Okay,
yeah,
so, sounds like you need more.
more.
Yeah, you need more ventilation. I mean, that's the first thing, but if you're seeing it across all of the area, you might wanna consider where you have your bees. And now, when it's cold, by the way, is the time to move them. You don't wanna move them when they're in operation. At night, while they're still in the box, you could kinda pick them up and move them to another spot. But once they're in operation, then you have to perform a different activity to be able to move them. So the key is ventilation.
Yep, so to answer your question though about the moldy frames,
Yes,
the bees will clean them up.
all right.
Now, that's assuming there's not too much mold, okay? So, I mean, you've gotta make that judgment. But if there's a little mold on a couple of them, and the frames are worth saving because the comb is relatively new, I mean, but if it's black, old, comb, and got mold all over it, cull it out and let them build some new. But if it's comb worth saving and there's a little mold on it, you can put it in and the bees will clean it up.
Thank you.
Do you wanna tip the hive slightly forward so water,
Yeah, so the question is, do you tip it forward? Yes.
okay.
You should always tip the entrance down, especially if you're using solid bottom boards. Think about going into winter, if it's tilted flat or back, the water's gonna collect and freeze on the bottom. You always kind of wanna have a percentage of tilt so that water would run off if it landed on the bottom board. The bees will clean up something that's driven in, but for the most part, rain should not be running back in. So you always wanna have a little tilt on your hives. What you don't wanna do is have a tilt side to side. They always should be level from front to back so that when they hang from each other using gravity. And if your hive is this way, your comb is gonna be built crooked all the time inside the comb. Because they festoon where they hang like a barrel of monkeys from each other down to build comb. And you don't want your hive to be the Leaning Tower of Pizza because all your comb will be angled.
Okay?
I got a question. As your cluster moves up into the second hive, does the bottom hive empty of bees, of cluster,
Now, at this point, the brood nest is expanding both ways.
both ways?
Yeah.
And maybe we should talk about that. How big does the brood nest get? Right? I mean, I think that the standard thinking and what I've read is the maximum size that the brood nest gets is somewhere around 2.5 deeps.
Yeah.
Now, is that always the case? No. Can you have one that's 3 deeps? I'm sure you can. But that's kind of the biggest brood nest that you're gonna develop. Pierre, do you wanna comment on that? That's what I've heard. About right?
I say the same thing, 2.5 to 3 deep. Sometimes if you had a huge stack, they'd move a little bit higher from the bottom entrance, but think about it. That's longer that they have to walk for every trip. So they tend to be at the bottom of the stack. You could put 12 boxes on that, they'll be in those bottom 3 boxes.
So again, that's the advantage of checkerboarding, is you can build up here into that second and third box to make the maximum size brood nest, the most bees available when you've got that full flow on.
Is a suggestion that if you have at least 3 deep or even 4 deep, that you're always gonna avoid a swarm?
No. No, again, so it comes down to what's in those 4 boxes. If you've got that honey dome, they're gonna build down. So say you left it like this, right? So what's gonna happen is they're gonna consume this, they're gonna get up to here, right? They're gonna work down to here, and they're gonna work probably up to about this. But what Walt Wright says is they get to a point where they have a reserve, and that's the minimum amount that they wanna have around to keep as an insurance policy, a safety stock, if you will. So they won't, once they get up to what they consider to be that reserve up here, they won't consume anymore. And what will happen is, as they're bringing in nectar, they'll start backfilling, and they'll backfill into the empty cells in the brood nest, driving the brood nest down, shrinking it, and that's one of the main causes or triggers for swarming, is backfilling the brood nest, shrinking the brood nest down. Okay? So, that's the dynamic.
So does this suggest that if you do have 3, 4 boxes, you should be culling honey in May and June just to create that empty space? I've been trying that.
Yeah, and mixed results.
They still swarm.
Yeah. Well, so,
You know, it's probably, they probably decide
Yeah,
earlier.
and
to
that's
swarm.
the key, right?
it's timing.
You never know what the trigger is. The trigger could be, a lot of people always thought it was too many bees, right? All the bees are emerging in spring because the queen's laying like a machine. Now all of a sudden there's all these bees. Think about it. If I asked you all, if you all stood up, you could stand in a relatively small space. I've said this before. Now I ask you all to stand up and lay down. Now think, all the bees are in the comb this way. When they emerge, they're this way. All of a sudden, we're banging into each other all the time. The other thing that happens is, you get a large contingent of bees, I can't smell the queen anymore. The queen is the thing that holds it all together. So there's various things, nectar flow and backfill, number of bees, I've gotten to my reserves and I don't wanna take anymore. There's a lot of different swarm triggers. If any one of those swarm impulses happens and somebody sets the alarm and everybody's in swarm mode, even if you did this, you might still get a swarm out of it. So the key here is to get ahead of this, right? That's why we're talking to you today about this.
So what Walt Wright says is, in order to make it applicable from his area in Tennessee to your area up here north, is you need to checkerboard when the elms are blooming, right before the maples bloom. That's early, right? I told you I went up and checkerboarded on March 15th. I had nothing blooming in my yard. On March 21st, I had a lone silver maple that, it was a renegade, and it bloomed, and the tree was full of bees on those warm days. And now it's gone, and the rest of the maples still haven't bloomed in my yard. So I don't know what was going on with that one, but I guess there's one in every group.
So I think you're suggesting checkerboarding, it's too late this year.
It is late right now, yes. Yep. To prevent swarming, right?
Well, we were saying March 15th is an ideal time for that, and we're only actually a couple weeks behind that, and we said we were a week or possibly 2 weeks behind. So it is a notion that you could still do, possibly. It's on the late end of it.
Okay, we're gonna talk about opening up the brood nest. So this is typically done, go ahead.
So suppose you bought a new hive and you had honey from another hive, would you checkerboard above the new hive?
Would you
Put
use
the
that?
bees in the bottom and checkerboard?
If you had that situation where you had a honey dome and you wanted to checkerboard, could you use frames from another hive, honey frames? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm saying, I say I just bought a hive, and the
Okay.
bees just came in. And
Okay,
I
so let's
put
do
'em in
this
the-
here,
Right?
okay?
And I put them in the hive, and I have extra honey. Where would I put that honey? Would it help them out if I put it in the hive?
Yeah, put it on top.
Put it on top?
Put it on top, just put another box right
And then
on
keep
and
on
they'll
top.
use it as they need it. If there's a nectar flow, they probably won't,
Uh-huh.
or maybe they will, it's up to them, they make that decision. But they'll pull it down and use it and eat it and consume it, and it'll just become part of the factory.
So you'd put it in another box on top?
On another box on top.
You can
Yeah.
do that, or you
Or
can
you
take,
put it to the outside of the brood
you
chamber.
can take a couple of frames and put them to the outside of where your brood nest is, and they'll use that as they work out, and then once it's used up, they'll hopefully take the brood nest all the way out to the sides.
Okay.
A lot of times the bees don't like to raise brood on those outside sides of the box, maybe because it gets cold, I don't know why, but sometimes it's hard. But I would put those frames full of honey there, because then they're closer to the brood nest where they need to use them.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, opening the brood chamber. So the first thing I would say about this is something that's done later on in the spring. Okay, when it's warmer, when you're not getting those freezing nights anymore, okay? Because what you're doing here is, you've got your brood nest spanning both boxes. So what you're doing is you're taking 2 frames of brood. What are we doing with them?
You're moving them out,
Moving them out, completely out.
and you're putting drawn comb in.
Okay, I see, so this is where the brood nest ended before, right? So you're taking this frame out, you're putting it to the outside, taking this frame out, you're putting it to the outside, and you're putting two frames of drawn comb in the middle. There are a lot of different ways to do this. So some people will only put 1 frame in the middle, okay, because they're afraid of the brood getting chilled. Some people won't even touch these frames in the middle, they'll just put them on the outside, the empty frames. So there's a lot of variations on this theme, but the idea is to give them extra space, so as the brood nest expands, the queen has somewhere to lay. So again, the key to this is, are you comfortable that there are enough bees in the hive
Yeah.
to be able to cover that empty space and still keep the brood warm? Or not necessarily even cover that empty space, but are there enough bees in the hive to cover the brood so that the brood doesn't chill? So this is later on in the year, when the temperatures are warmer at night, and when you have enough bees to be able to cover the brood to keep them warm in case you do get a cold night.
If you think about the biology of this, in the first picture, there are nurse bees to cover all those frames. And what's out to the outside is typically, you have honey in frame 1 and frame 10. And you have a combination of honey and pollen outside the brood chamber, okay, in frame 2 and 9. And you have your brood in the middle. This is just simply going to give a little bit more space for the queen to lay eggs. By moving the brood to the outside, you take those frames on the outside and move them up if you have to, or do whatever. This is a temporary stopgap, but one thing about it is the brood that you're moving to the outside, it already had a quality of nurse bees there to cover it. So when you move it out, they're going to move to where the brood is. You're going to have those frames in the middle. Where you get the difficulty on the cold nights is you have an empty frame of just drawn comb next to a brood frame, and if it gets chilly, there's nobody on that frame to generate heat. So you have heat, 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 cold, heat, 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 cold in that picture. So you want to do it when it's somewhat warmer, and you want to do it when there's a quantity of bees in the hive. You should not do this break early in your spring. Not a good idea to break that chamber out. Some people will tell you it's blasphemy, to absolutely blasphemy, to go in the middle of that brood chamber and break it up. The bees wanted it the way they wanted it, you're messing with nature. We're just showing you a technique, that's all we're doing. You're up.
I mean, Walt Wright would tell you that this is setting the bees back. You're really working against the bees here by doing this. But that's one man's opinion. You know, a lot of folks do it.
There are people who do this routinely and do well with it. So we're going to show you the options you can pick and choose.
Would you just add to the bottom, or would you add one or two on top and stagger them?
Well, wait a second, we're
Okay.
going to show you that one.
Okay, so another technique which is called pyramiding up. Okay, this, I guess, is credited to D. Lusby.
Yeah.
And in this case, you've got your brood nest spanning two boxes. And what you're going to do is you're going to take some of those outside frames of brood and you're going to move them up above the brood nest in the second box in a new third box. Okay, so you're taking frames from here and you're moving them up and you're creating this pyramid. And what this is doing is this is encouraging the bees to move up into that top box because there's brood there, and encouraging the queen to go up there and lay as well. So it's a technique really just to help the bees get the idea that, yeah, there's this space up there. Because sometimes if you just put an empty box on with drawn comb, it takes them a while to go up there and use it. This is a technique that encourages them, because there's brood up in that box, to build up, and now they've got a lot of room. They've got room in the second box, and they've got a lot of room up in the third box.
So I need 10 frames of drawn comb in order to do this.
Yes.
Yeah. That should say step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is take the brood frames on the outside and move them up. Step 2 is take the honey and pollen frames and move them in. And they'll have outside, above, and around, right? And to Bob's point, the top box now has some form of incentive to come up there, but it's also sitting right over the brood chamber, which is underneath, which is generating heat, which heat rises. So now you've taken the shape of the brood chamber, which looked like this, and you've made it a little bit, what do they say, the chimney effect. The bees almost always build through those 4 frames through the middle, right? Again, this is optional. There are people who will say this is blasphemy. There's a big number of people who use this technique effectively.
So Kevin brings up a great point. So typically in your brood nest, so you've got your brood in the middle, in the center of the box. Then usually there's pollen on the frames next to it. Why is that? Because pollen is the protein that they need in order to generate, to grow new young. So the pollen is right there where they need it, and the outside frames are usually honey, because again, they need to consume honey in order to make the bee food that they feed to the young. Right, so that's typically how it is, and that's what Kevin was saying here. So once you empty these frames out, you want to make sure you move the brood right, you move the pollen right to the outside of the brood nest and the honey there as well. So a question?
I just wondered if anyone had tried this method here. No? You have,
Yeah,
and
We did this, we showed this technique last year when we did the splits meeting. And this worked really, that, the one hive that survived is the one we pyramided, right?
not everyone calls it pyramiding up, right? Some people just do it. You know, when they put a new box on, they just take a couple of frames of brood from the outside, and they just put them up top in the middle. And again, the idea is just to encourage them to build up. So it's not always called checkerboarding.
Or pyramiding, it's just a technique that people use, but we have to give it a label so you understand what it is.
Pyramiding is a checkerboard. Go ahead.
At what point then, Bob, do you put on your honey supers?
Okay, so here, we've still got room, right, for them to build out into stored nectar. All right, so I would say as they're filling this box up and get maybe 7 or 8 frames full, I would also say this, Kevin and I have been having this discussion. I think there's a lot going on in the hive early in the season, and as new beekeepers, 5 years, I'm not an expert, I think we've been supering too late, okay? I think that there's a flow on before the main flow that you can get, and you can help get more honey if you've got supers on earlier in the year. So I would say super earlier rather than later.
Who has notes of what, you've seen flowers already? What have you seen? Shout it out.
Maple.
Silver maple, crocuses, reds are just about ready to pop.
Pussy willows.
Snow
Skunk
cabbage.
cabbage.
Stone cabbage.
Yep.
The bees are bringing in nectar right now.
And they're bringing in a lot of pollen, yeah?
And we, I'm
How does
sorry.
all this fit in for people that are new and don't have frames with drawn comb on it? Just still put it on with the foundation this time of year?
Well, again, no,
Or
so-
earlier, rather than later?
You need to go in and look once it gets warm enough,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't have these extra frames to do all of this, what you wanna do is, you're trying to grow that hive up for winter, so they can
Right.
survive winter. So what do you want? You wanna try to build up that brood nest, and by the end of the summer, have the top deep full of honey, and the bottom deep is where your bees are, right, at a minimum. So what you're trying to do, you gotta go in there and look at, you're trying to build bees right now, and stores. You're not looking to get honey necessarily, it'd be nice if you did, but your job right now is to get enough bees and enough honey on there by the end of the summer, so that they can make it through the winter. If they make more than they need, then you're lucky you got some honey this year. But your goal should be to help those bees build out. So if they're in one box now, for example, right, you wanna wait till they build up to 7 or 8 frames and put a second box on. And you may even wanna do this pyramiding up, move a couple frames up to encourage them to build out in that second box,
Yeah, I have mediums, and they wintered over,
okay?
3 boxes.
3 boxes.
Okay? But, someone came out and helped me and did a reversed them, but also added boxes already, but they're only foundation because I didn't have drawn comb.
Yep.
Is that the right thing to do, or not the right thing to do?
It's, like I said, you can super early, I think it's a good idea. I'm not sure that they're drawing wax right now, that they
Right.
draw wax until they get a better flow. They might, so you might.
Is it better than what you were saying about 7 or 8, just maybe put 1 box on when they get the comb on 7 or 8 frames, then add another box?
You're talking about having foundation.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Again,
I'm afraid it's too much to keep warm.
That's the consideration, right?
Yeah,
And
so I was
that's-
thinking of
gonna
going
even
in-
say that's,
Yeah,
what Walt Wright will tell you is that bees are not drawing white wax, new wax, until the main flow is on.
okay.
Maybe
So-
earlier, is
so-
he always right? No.
Well, why not feed at this point?
feed, is
Just to build the comb, and
Yeah, there you
in
go.
2 weeks, 3 weeks,
yeah.
yank the feed off.
I wasn't even thinking about that.
That's
a
where I
great
was gonna
idea.
go. So in your
Okay.
situation, look, anybody else running just medium hives? Okay, just one more, okay? 3 mediums equal to 2 deeps. Within reason, I mean, you have different bottom bar situations, so you have a little less square footage. Wherever your colony is, applies to the 2 deep method. Anybody that has a new hive that overwintered And by the way, most of this talk is predicated on you just overwintered, what do you do? If you're starting a new hive and you're getting a nuke or whatever, we'll have a different conversation for you next time, right? But in this case, if you don't have any drawn comb, and it's warm enough that you're on the right target, you wanna make sure that, now look, the inside of the hive is the ambient temperature of the air outside, plus or minus this little cushion around the cluster, right? So putting that box on generally doesn't hurt them, but heat rises. So if you're giving 2 spaces above the brood chamber and all that heat rises, where's it collecting? Up here in no man's land.
Right.
So bring that down. But if it's to the point where they're operational, they're building bees, new bees can create wax. And if you feed them, they might get industrious and build that first one out. And once they start building wax, as soon as they get it mostly drawn, put the next box on and just keep climbing the steps.
Okay.
So let's take 1 minute to talk about feeding, because I wasn't even thinking that way. So, when do you feed your bees?
Whenever you need it.
When they need it, okay? So, what does that mean? It means if you want them to draw out comb, you're gonna feed them, right? Because they think that the flow is on, there's a lot of nectar coming in, and they're gonna build space for it, okay? When else would you feed? You might feed early in the spring. Some people feed early in the spring to stimulate the hive if there's not a lot of honey in there, okay? So that they can start building up quickly. And probably the most important time, or the time that most people will feed, is in the fall if they don't have enough honey stores, okay? They'll feed 2 to 1, a really thicker, heavy syrup, so that they can pack those stores away for the winter if they don't have enough. But that's what Bob Hughes will tell you, and Tim Schuler will tell you, you feed when you need to. So you don't just feed to feed, you feed when you need to. So think about what you want to do, what you need to do, and that's your decision of whether you feed or not.
If you're gonna feed right now though, you have to keep feeding. Think about it. You feed, grow, 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 grow. All of a sudden you have all these bees and you go, oh, I have all the bees I want, and I stop feeding. They starve, right? You just close the refrigerator on them, basically. You have to keep feeding them until the nectar flow, keep giving them
So you
space.
feed until you see dandelion.
You feed until you see dandelions, forsythia, whatever it is that you think is the indication of the nectar flow. So, a question in the back?
Yeah, how many boxes high do you think would be the limit to go? Like how tall do you want your hives?
Realistically, in New Jersey, you tend to have 3 for the brood chamber, you tend to have 2 or 3 for the honey chamber. There are people who will stack them to the ceiling and get on a ladder. You generally don't see that very often around here. I had one last year that was taller than me, Bob, so, you know, it does happen on occasion. Most times what happens is you go to 3 for the brood chamber, you put a couple mediums on, you generally don't, unless you're E-man, you don't use deeps for honey supers because they get really heavy. And you put 2 on, and when they're full, you pull one off and you put another one underneath, and you just keep rotating them, you don't keep stacking them up, so.
Yeah,
5 is the answer.
probably a little bit like the other one here, where I had my first hives last year. I had two supers with brood, another super that, you know, I did nothing but feed them last year. So a full super with honey and then another honey super on top of it. So I went in with a ton of honey, and they came out, everyone was strong, and I still had a ton of honey.
Yeah.
I went in on the 15th of March, but I was nervous about the swarm, and so I didn't have any other drawn comb. So I pulled quite a bit of the honey out, and I left some in there, and the queen was already starting to lay at that point, and it was in there. So I put in foundation, but also started to feed at that point, like the idea being like feed them until they draw the comb out. And now I'm nervous because it's getting cold again. So like, have I put the hive at risk? Do I need to be, you know, going back and putting some of the other honey frames back? And I did leave some in, but so, you know. But I had no drawn comb to put in there to replace.
You have 2 deeps worth of brood?
I got 2 deeps of brood, and then there's I now have the next deep on that's got some honey that I left in there in the center, but the rest is you know, foundation.
Going into fall, they need 60 to 80 pounds. When they come out in the spring, you know, the minimum you wanna have on a hive is 20 pounds, which is one deep both sides, right? If you have 3 or 4 frames of honey in there and the rest is empty, they're probably okay. Especially right now, bees are out getting something.
And I'm feeding them up the top too.
And if you're feeding them, they're good. You're okay.
And although it's getting cold at night, it's not getting bitter cold at night. So, you know, even if we do get down to freezing, most of the bees can usually handle it. And when you start having those 40-degree nights and those 45 and 50, it's just gonna get easier for them.
Yeah, I still got wrapped with tar paper, so.
How many see piles of dead bees outside of your box? Yeah, 'tis the season, don't get alarmed about that, hopefully. I mean, there's reasons that could happen, but any of the bees that expired that they didn't get to clean out, and especially since they've only had 10 days to operate, remember, or 20-something days to operate, they're now undertakers are going to town. And they could break that cluster when it's warm and 60 degrees. They're doing housekeeping and they're pulling them all out. Typically, they fly away, but when they have lots of them, sometimes they just drop them at the thing. What you wanna make sure right now is if you do have honey stores and there's competition for something, that you have your entrances closed off and that you're not in a robbing situation, right? Because you can get to that right now, but for the most part, you should be okay. They're doing housekeeping.
I just wondered, how early did you pyramid when you did it?
Again, I think this is something that's typically done a little bit later in the year.
We did it
when you're-
April
Yeah, when you're adding,
21st last year. So in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
I'm not worried too much about a robbing situation because I'm seeing a lot of bees going in with pollen on their lands. But I am concerned about when it's okay to start feeding them the 2-to-1 mix. Because you were telling us last fall, moisture is the enemy.
Yeah.
I've been giving them fondant all over the winter and they've done pretty well with it. I was wondering what your thoughts were.
so like, goes back to my question, why do you wanna feed them?
Well, I wanna make sure, they've wintered over, I'm proud of them, you know, but I wanna make sure I don't do anything to compromise them.
Do you know how much honey is in there, or is there enough honey for them? Have you
Well,
hefted it up at all, just to see if it's light or heavy?
I've been in there a couple times over the last month, and, my philosophy is the less intrusive, the better. But, I gotta tell you, Bob, I haven't weighed anything, you know, like this.
Okay. So again, I think if you wanna feed to stimulate the bees, you're not sure if they have enough, or you just want it to stimulate them a little bit more, you don't use 2-to-1, use 1-to-1. But yes, you can start feeding 1-to-1 now, it's warm enough at night. Now, the bees are only gonna take it when it's above 50,
Okay.
typically, right? But you can start feeding 1-to-1 if you wanna stimulate them and give a little boost.
Couple of things about springtime feeding. If you put it on there, liquid, it's gonna be as cold as, the bees get industrious in the morning, it's gonna be as cold as the overnight. And if it's cold, they're not gonna use it. So fondant would be the better answer. You feed the fondant and whatever for emergency. My experience is, once you get to the crocus bloom, skunk cabbage, snowdrops, those first buds that come off for trees, they've got what they need. As soon as you start seeing them bringing in fresh pollen for spring, you don't have to feed them. If you're feeding for stimulation, feed them small amounts, don't put gallons on there. And the other thing you wanna be careful is if you overfeed them and they backfill that brood chamber, you're gonna create your own swarm situation there, right? Not nature, you. So, you know, how many have done a heft? Pull up on the hive. Pull it up. If it's got any bit of weight, you know, also why do you wanna spend your money on feed at this point too? If you're weeks, couple weeks from the nectar flow right now, so if you haven't started feeding, chances are you don't have to.
So I think the point was made already, there is nectar out there now, and it's just gonna become more, not less. So it's gonna build up until what's typically at the dandelion flow, folks will tell you there's a pretty steady flow going on now, and then it'll build up to the main flow. But there is nectar out there now on all of these plants that we were talking about, that we see blooming in our yards. You know, my bees were all over those snowdrops. How they can find them, I don't know, but they do, right?
So you talk about swarm prevention, but you haven't mentioned, buy a queen and do a split.
We're-
Okay.
What a
Next,
great leader.
look, you've read our mind.
Here's your,
Okay, or you can make a split. There are probably hundreds and hundreds of ways to make a split. Okay, but the idea in a split is you're gonna take one colony and you're gonna make two or more out of it. Okay, and one way to do that is to make a nuke. So you're gonna pull out 2 frames of brood, 1 frame of pollen, excuse me,
2 frames of brood.
2 frames of brood, I'm sorry, I would put it empty way. 2 frames of brood, 1 of pollen.
That's empty,
That's empty.
yeah.
Okay. 2 frames of brood, 1 of pollen, 1 of honey, and an empty. That's one way. That's what I would do. That's how I would do it.
Yeah.
Empty with a comb, right?
Yes.
Empty with comb if you have.
Yes. Yes. Or
So 1 frame of pollen, 2 frames of brood.
2 frames of brood, 1 frame of pollen, 1 empty frame, and 1 frame of honey. 5 frames. That's assuming.
The equation is simple, you need bees, and they should be, hopefully you could find an open frame of brood and a capped frame of brood. So you have a lifespan there of new bees and emerging bees that are gonna take care of those new bees, plus the bees that came with them, the nurse bees, right? And then what do they need? They need honey and or nectar for storage, or for carbos, and they need pollen. So it's the full equation of bees, nectar, and pollen. And then they need space for the queen to lay. She's gotta have some place to do what she's gotta do. So you put a frame of drawn comb if you have it.
Where is the queen?
The magic question.
So
That's a great question.
you can do it any way you want. You can either, if you can find the queen, you can put the queen in here. Then you know where she is, and you need to make sure that you've got eggs in open brood, young larvae in here, they'll raise their own queen. Or, queen's in here, you don't know where she is. You know she's not on these frames because you've looked at them as you took them out. You're comfortable they're not there. You gotta make sure you've got enough eggs and young larvae in here for this nuke to raise a queen. Or, you can buy a queen and put her in here. Okay? So there's, like I said, when splitting, there's an infinite number of ways to do it. And they have all kinds of different names, and some people call them one thing and some people call them others. But the idea is that you're making more colonies out of the one strong colony that you have. So what you have to keep in mind as you're splitting is you gotta give them young bees, especially if they're gonna make their own queen. You need to have eggs, young larvae, and enough nurse bees. You need to give them food, so they need to have honey, and they need to have pollen. And they need room, so they need some empty frames.
So you're saying if you have a young larva, then that's early enough that they could turn that into a queen if they want.
As long as they're less than 3 days old, yes. So the tiny little ones,
Right.
okay, not the ones that are, look like grubs, they're tiny,
Yeah.
tiny ones.
By the way, public service announcement, April 26th is the splits meeting. And we're literally going out to the mentoring hives hands-on, we'll show you how to do these, and we'll talk about the technique, right? So if you want to learn more about this, we're going to give you all you need.
So you don't need to encourage a queen cell to force a queen cell build in the first hive, you just go ahead and put the frames in and they do it on their own?
Yeah, so what happens is, within a couple of hours, the pheromone dissipates, the queen's pheromones, and the hive knows it's queenless. Once it knows it's queenless, it's gonna select larvae of the correct age, and they're gonna
2
decide.
days or younger, hopefully one day. And
Younger
is
the better, and they're gonna continue to feed them royal jelly, and they're gonna decide how many they wanna make and which ones they're gonna make into queens. But you've gotta give them eggs and young larvae. If their larvae are too old, or there are no larvae, that hive is gonna go queenless, because they have no way to make a queen. They need larvae that's less than 3 days old to make a queen.
They also need drones that are at least 4 or 5 weeks old.
So great point. You can't do this when there's no drones around. Why? Because your queen is gonna hatch in 16 days, she's gonna go out to mate, and go to one of these drone congregation areas. Everybody know what a drone congregation area is? Single bars for bees. That's where they go. And if there's no drones to mate with, or there's not enough drones to mate with, she's gonna be poorly mated. And you're gonna have a queen that's gonna lay poorly, or she's gonna sputter out early. So you need
But
to
this
make.
hive is next to the other hive, there's probably gonna be plenty of drones around, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Like, Roger, you gotta go in and look.
Huh?
Yeah, have you seen any, you been in any of your?
I have not seen any yet, no.
No, it's early.
But I mean, I've got some hives that are real good, I wanna do some artificial superseders or artificial swarms with,
Yep,
but I gotta wait till the drones are done.
there you go. So we gotta look.
I
Got
think they
cap
need to
drones in
be-
there, or drones?
They need to be like 4 or 5 weeks old too before they're sexually mature. So like in the early spring, you still have to give them a little time.
Yep. I mean, again, I tell you what some people think. The best time really to do splits is when you've got a good flow on, right? Ideal time is when the flow is on in the spring, there's plenty of bees, plenty of drones around. That's when you want to be doing your splits.
If you've got a real good hive and you wanna do a couple of splits later on, once you got the drone, and you take that queen out, if you notch a couple of egg frames at different locations in that other hive, you might be able to get a couple more splits out of that mother hive.
So what Roger's talking about, okay? What happens when they decide which larvae they're gonna make into a queen, they have to break down the cell wall on the bottom in order to make that little peanut-shaped queen cell, right? So number one, you wanna make sure that the frame you're putting in with young larva and brood is fairly new comb, nice soft comb, not old wonky dark black comb, because then they won't be able to chew the cell wall down as well, okay? But what Roger is saying, if you want to encourage them where, you look for the larvae that are about the right age, and you just break down, you notch it, break down that lower cell wall, and that encourages them, makes it easier for them to be able to build that queen cell down. Anything else, Roger?
Well, you could do that on 4 or 5 frames, if you've got a good strong mother colony, and you could be raising queens for other splits.
Right.
So you gotta, once they've got them capped, you wanna split it up.
Right, so you can encourage them to make a lot of queen cells, and what Roger's saying, you need to make sure you get in there before the first one hatches, because when that first one hatches, she's gonna go around and kill the rest of them, unless the bees prevent her.
If bees swarm and they go to a tree or a fence post or whatever, and you're able to get them into a new hive body in boxes, will they make their own queen, or do you have to get another queen and put it in?
So typically, the swarm will have a queen. So when you capture that swarm, hopefully you've captured the queen. Most of the times you will. So that'll be the old queen, but you'll have one, you won't need one.
And then in the hive box originally, they'll make a new queen?
That's right. As a matter of fact, they won't swarm until there's capped queen cells in the old hive. So they'll start those queen cells, swarm cells they're called, they're usually on the bottom of the frame, and there's anywhere from 1 to 10 or more.
Yes.
And once those are capped, that's when the swarm will go. So within a week, those cells will hatch, and the virgin queens will be out to go out and mate. The other thing about the swarm is, those guys, they're great comb builders, right? Because that's what they're out there doing. They know that they're looking for a new home, and they want to build comb like crazy. So you want to make sure you give them enough space and enough room to build comb and for the queen to lay.
2 questions. Number 1, as you make your split, you have to have a physical distance between the new and the old. And number 2, do you close the entrance down on the new?
So,
Take it or should I?
I'll take this one.
Okay.
When you're pulling those frames out, you're taking the nurse bees. And ideally, what would happen, and again, we'll get into this when we do split techniques. Ideally, what would happen is you would take a frame out of the hive that has nurse bees on it, and you would shake it off into that nuke box, or into the new colony you're gonna create. So you make sure that they have enough nurse bees. if by chance the frames that you brought out had foragers in it, the nurse bees are loyal to the brood. The foragers are loyal to the queen. If you have them sitting next to each other, the foragers are gonna go back, but the nurse bees will stay there. If you, by happenstance, you've taken all the nurse bees from this hive, and they don't have enough, they'll demote themselves to a nurse bee. So that takes care of itself, right? You should be able to put a split right next to another one. That's one method. There's other methods, as Bob said, right? Some methods you do splits and you take that 3 miles away, and it makes its own colony.
A good question about the hive entrance. So you want to make sure that the hive entrance is not too large, especially if you have strong hives next to it, because they'll rob it out. So you want to give them an entrance space that they can defend. So that's why a lot of people like to take it 3 miles away, their nuke, because the nuke is a young hive. It's not a strong hive, right? It's a baby hive, basically, baby colony, and it's just starting to grow. So you want to keep an eye on that and make sure you don't give them too much space to defend.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about splits. There's millions and millions of ways to do it. Millions? No, hundreds maybe. Okay, first scenario.
So this is a scenario where you don't know what's going on. How many have not been in their box yet? Raise your hand. 1, 2. I haven't opened it up. I see bees flying at the entrance. They're bringing in pollen and they're doing cleansing flights. I haven't gone in yet. So what do? Shout it out, right? What do?
Get in there.
Get in there.
Get the smoker out.
Get the smoker out. Go in. Now what if it's too cold or you haven't had the chance or whatever? Are you in jeopardy here?
Yeah.
Not really. They're in there doing their thing, and the key is, if they're bringing back pollen, what are they doing?
They're getting ready.
Yeah, there's eggs getting fed, right? They're getting ready, they're going. The thing you could do is do a little heft on them. Do they have enough stores? Maybe you're still in a winter mode, you can give them a little bit of food if they're light. But at this time of year, we're in the beginning of April, if they're bringing in pollen, you're probably good to go, and wait till that first warm day when you have the opportunity to do your inspection. Now, if they're booming, don't wait too long. But at this point, scenario X, test for hef. If it's reasonable, leave them alone. If light, to your point before, feed them and wait for the warmer weather. Okay?
And again, you can take a quick peek in the hives on those 45, 50, 55, but you don't want to be doing an inspection where you're taking all the frames out and taking it apart. It's still too cold for that, okay? But if you want to go in and see what's going on, take a quick peek, lift the box up, take a quick peek on the top, you can do that, but make sure it's a warmish day like today, and don't spend a lot of time in there, just get an idea of what's going on, so then you know what to do. But once you get to be 60 degrees and above, you can go in there and do a full inspection. Scenario 1, large cluster of bees, lots of stores up top.
What do you do?
Come on, somebody must do this.
You could checkerboard. Yep. What else could you do? Pyramid. What else could you do? Reverse. Okay. You could potentially. You have to see how the brood chamber is situated. What else should you do?
Split.
You could split them. Again, think about all the caveats we told you: warmth, temperature, drawn comb availability, when the nectar flows on, all the notes that you
But
took.
if
Make
you
sure
don't
you
see
do
a lot
them.
of bees in the bottom, you could rotate.
Yeah, you could. What else could you do?
What you just said, there's a honeycomb, why would you rotate here? Right?
Agreed.
Reverse?
You wouldn't really.
Right.
That's a good point.
You don't gain anything
You don't.
by rotating.
Yeah,
other than
sorry,
just
you
rotating
just
the
Split your
brood.
brood though, right?
You don't want to split your brood up, right? That's a good point. You don't want to do a reversal with the way that it's situated here. Again, if they're up against the second box,
Is there enough honey to take some?
There you go.
And
Sure,
make
take
sure
some.
there is.
Yeah.
Absolutely there
It's
is.
coming, so.
Sure, you know, you can checkerboard this box if you want, take every other one, and put a,
Yeah.
The one I was waiting for is put more boxes on top.
absolutely, that last one.
That's what I'm waiting for. I'll give you the mulligan on this one. Put more boxes on top.
Let's say you.
You're good. This is where you all wanna be next winter.
I've been waiting for this. Okay,
Yeah.
where would you put the box? Would you,
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Hit the thing. Add more supers, checkerboard, consider splits, add a slotted rack. Now, adding the box, what do you wanna do? There are options, just like splits, there's options. You can put them on top, you can put them in the middle, right above the brood chamber and under the dome. You can under super, like the Ware method. Ideally, you're gonna do any of those things where you're separating the brood and whatever, you're putting drawn comb in there and it's warm when you're doing it. Remember the space that we're giving and where heat goes as your heat goes to the top, right? So take those things into consideration when you're doing those techniques. If you're getting to the point where it's 65 every day, nighttime is 50-ish, they're moving around all the time, they're not literally having to cluster per se all night long to stay from dying, you can start getting creative as to how you want to do it. The key that I would say, what we talked about, is you really don't want to break the brood chamber up, like split it in half. So I would be really careful about putting a box in there. I might put one up there. I might want to put one underneath. I might add the slatted rack, like we talked about.
So what I would do here, and
But
this,
you always could put boxes on top.
this is what Walt Wright would do, is he checkerboard this one, like I said, so you take 4 or 5 frames for yourself, put comb in, and then I would put a couple supers with drawn comb on the top. It'd be in pretty good shape, because what's gonna happen, the brood chamber is gonna develop, it's gonna maximize out somewhere here, and then they're gonna store honey up here, so you've given them plenty of room. You've broken up the honey dome so that they'll build up into this box. So typically when Walt Wright does his checkerboarding, he also adds 2 empty honey supers. Now, he's a little bit warmer than we are, so you gotta make sure it's warm enough, but then you're pretty well set for a while.
you mentioned the Ware. If you did that, you put the box way on the bottom,
Way on the bottom.
and you didn't do anything else, and there's lots of honey on top.
Yeah,
Will the bees
they will build
actually
down.
do what they do inside the tree?
Yeah, they will,
They will actually.
yeah.
If you've seen this really work.
Well, the
Because
Warwick
that's
guy
a-
was here when did we see him?
So
Last year.
I
And he talked about that, and he said, yes, they'll build down, they'll move the down, right? They'll always
Because
have the
that's the
honey
least-
up,
I'm sorry.
so they'll actually fill that down, and they may even move the whole brood chamber down in the box. That's what his suggestion was, right?
Because that's the least disturbance for this box.
Yeah,
And disturbance always sets them back a week or something,
yeah.
So it depends who you're talking to, right? Some people will tell you the bees always build up, right? Other people will tell you they'll build down. So what, Palmer is another guy that I read, he's a commercial beekeeper in Vermont, and he says most of the time they will build down. Every now and then you get one that's reluctant. What might you do if they weren't building down? Pyramid down, right? Put a couple of frames down there, encourage them to go down.
Michael Bush talked about this topic.
They will build down, absolutely.
When we went to see Michael, if you remember what he said, people keep bees in horizontal hives. If they build up, how does that work? He said the bees will build to the space that's available to them. By the way, there's no wrong answer. The bees will figure it out. That is the right answer. They'll figure it out. No matter what you do, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, usually the bees will figure it out. Sometimes they'll suffer for it. Because remember what we said, if you put one underneath, then every time they come in to do any activity, they gotta go 12 inches higher, right? Just as an example. You should go out and figure out what works for you and how you wanna do it. Conventional wisdom, you wanna know the straight and narrow, you put boxes on the top.
I'll give you another piece of advice that was given to me, which is, if you don't know what to do nothing. Because you'll probably cause more harm than good,
Yeah.
right? So that's from Michael Bush. Michael will tell you, if you look in there and you're confused and you don't know what to do, close it back up and leave it to the bees, because you're just gonna make it worse.
They'll know what they're doing. Yeah,
If you were checkerboarding though, wouldn't you be adding the super to the top?
yeah, you'd be adding.
You know what I mean, that's.
Yeah, look, the mainstream from days of yore is that you put boxes on
Yeah.
top. You could literally, I mean, I showed in the last presentation we did last meeting. You could checkerboard, or you could move that honey up and put an empty box underneath with drawn comb or foundation. In the springtime, it doesn't matter, they're gonna make use of the space that they have available to them.
So I think the other thing that you need to understand about swarming is sometimes, no matter what you do, no matter when you do it, no matter how you do it, you didn't tell the bees that they're not supposed to swarm because you did some manipulation. Sometimes you can try everything you want and they're gonna swarm anyway. That winter we had 2 years ago when it was so warm, I mean, there were swarms everywhere. Every single one of my hives swarmed.
So if I have a swarm, should I take a box off?
I'm sorry?
If I have a swarm, should I take a box off? Because I just lost half my bees.
No,
No.
they'll fill it back in. They know what their space is available to them, they're managing their hive to the space. They know far more than we do.
So again, they're not gonna swarm unless the conditions are right for both hives, both colonies to survive. But that one spring we had, I think it was 2012, right? God, they were all over, there were swarms all over the place.
Yes.
Now, if I don't physically see a swarm, will I know when I go into my hive that, half the bees are gone?
You're a lot
Yes.
less bees.
You will. You'll go in and you'll say, boy, look at this 3 deep, boy, this thing is just booming. And you'll go in the next time and you'll know. Because there'll be half as many bees and you'll be able to tell. And you'll probably see queen cups, queen cells.
How far away do swarms go? Do they go like really far away to be in a whole separate area, or can they be nearby, or is there any kind of pattern?
Sometimes they'll go in the box next door, and sometimes they'll go 8 miles away.
They don't usually
So like
go
if you
too
set up an
far.
empty box next door, just in case?
Yeah, you
Put a
should,
vacancy sign?
one of the things we've talked about is, and Bob has them, and I'll be putting them up this year, swarm traps. You put boxes up around your property or with your neighbors, and the bees, if they find them palatable, they'll occupy them, otherwise they'll just ignore them.
Roger, tell us.
Huh?
Tell us. You leave a nuke box out there, right?
Yeah, right in my own driveway.
And they just go, oh, nice, right in there. So a lot of times if
I
you've
don't know
got,
where they came from.
you
It
got an
wasn't one
empty
of my
hive
queens.
sitting there and it's got some comb in it, old comb, if you're lucky, they just move in.
How do you know it wasn't one of your queens? How do you
Because
know?
all my queens are marked, and the queen that landed in there was not marked.
Oh, okay. I was like, no.
Yeah.
I would put a mouse guard on it, just to
Yeah.
kind of keep, mice out of it. Did that? Mouse guard.
Go as far as it can.
Every year is a different color, so you can tell how old your queens are.
Yeah. Yeah, question in the back?
I think this year is green or blue. Last year was red.
I admit it's off topic, and I do know what your philosophy is about this, Bob, but when do we start thinking about mite-away strips or apivar? At what point does that become a concern?
So I'll generalize that and say, when do you treat for varroa mite?
Yeah.
You treat for varroa mite when your checks show that you're at a threshold where you need to treat. Generically, if you listen to the state apiarist and the experience that he has, it will tell you it's July and early August, no later than that. If you're doing your treatments in September, you're walking dead. The bees are dead, right? Because we've talked about this dynamic, I'll be very quick about it. At some point, the queen is gonna ramp down because of the dearth of summer. All the bees are gonna emerge, and when they emerge and there's no cap cells in there, or there's minimal, all the mites come out and get on the bees, and then all the bees get sick. You wanna get them before that happens, that's July and August. Now, there's a rule of thumb here that some people will test right now, sample, and determine if you're at a threshold, and knock the mites down now. And then their ramp up through the year is gonna keep them at a lower level, so that when you get to July and August, if you're gonna treat, that's when you treat. mostly, a lot of people, if they're gonna treat in the spring, are the commercial people, because they don't have time to get out in July and get the honey off all of their thousands of hives. So they treat now to keep the mite load down so that they can get through that honey harvesting season and then treat, so.
So your issue about treating in the spring is you wanna make sure you treat with something that's not gonna affect your honey. So lighter weight quick strips is probably a good choice, right? Apiguard is probably not a good choice.
Yeah, and you also, some of these treatments, no matter what, they're harsh, right? And you're gonna whack a certain percentage of your bees just going into forage, which is gonna throw them off, because they're trying to build their workforce right now, so.
So, a lot of people medicate in the spring, and fall and spring. Do you guys do that, or, you know, with the terramycin?
Yeah, terramycin is a thing that people use. They're also using something to deal with nosema. I don't wanna give you advice on that. That's up to the beekeeper and whether they wanna do that. So, some people do it all the time. I don't know, I follow what the state acre says on these topics for those specific things. I think the general recollection is he doesn't do it, and he doesn't see people. If you can't prove the evidence of why that's really working for you, then why would you be putting that stuff in your hives, right? I think that's insane. Do you agree, or?
Yeah,
It kind of,
there's,
I know he doesn't like fumigillin.
yep.
And terramycin, if you have a problem, you'll use it. If you don't have a problem, I don't think he's advocating you put it in prophylactic. So.
What's his issue with fumigillin?
Fumigillin, the product fumigillin, Fu-little-B is a brand name for it, is used to treat nosema. There's two types of nosema, and it treats the one we don't have.
We don't know about it.
We don't generally see when they sample the bees. That's my understanding of that. So, okay, next one. Small to medium cluster, medium number of stores, what do you do? Hardest one to triage, so I'll give you a little more time.
Out of box.
Okay, out of box, gotta vote for that.
If you got a strong hive, take a frame of brood out, put it in, give them a boost.
Okay, so you could do an equalize. Some people like that idea, and other people would say, why would you wreck your strongest hive that's gonna make you the most honey? Some people, including the state apiarist, if you look at the calendar, it says you can equalize your weak hives with your stronger hives. I have to say this too, consideration. How many of you work for a living? How many of you don't get home till 6, 7 o'clock? How many of you end up being weekend beekeepers because of that? Yeah. I mean, look, when you get home at night and it's 55 degrees and all the foragers are back and you go open a hive, you're gonna get lit up. And then you go out on the weekend and it happens to rain or whatever, right? So we could be as ambitious as we want about how proactively, unless you're retired, just had to add that in there, right?
That's not always the answer either.
You have less time when you're retired.
Not always the answer.
That's great. There's a side effect to this too. I have a friend that follows me on the podcast, we interview him. His name is Jason. His philosophy is let him be. Just leave him in a box and let him be. Let the strong survive, right? And there's a certain elegance to that if you're a weekend beekeeper, I guess. And there's people who go the treatment-free route and all that other stuff. Again, your mileage may vary on how this works, but, you know, this is just great knowledge. You have to take this back and kind of look at what you have going in the box, and at least if you have a decision to make, you have some understanding of what your options are. You shouldn't be doing all this stuff. And Bob made a point where you're a new beekeeper, you have our permission to be in your bees, but do know that every time you open it up, when you're pulling frames out and you're chilling brood and doing all that stuff, you're setting them back, you're rearranging frames, you're breaking. One of the things Bob and I talked about recently was, we go in there every time and we crack the frames apart, we scrape the propolis off and we pull the frame out. And when we put it back, when you go back the next time, isn't it there again? How did it get there? They had to put it there. That's work, right? So do keep that in mind as you keep going in and manipulate and do whatever. But when you're a new beekeeper, you kind of have to do that. You have to sacrifice that. And if you're working on a new hive, that's okay, because they can tend to be more recovery, but you are setting them back, so just keep that in mind. All right, we have put a box on. Yeah,
I have a suggestion, because I had a similar scenario this year due to the fact that one of my hives fell over.
yep,
It fell over, and maybe it happened to some people's here. And when I went out there, I said, oh gee, it fell over, but I think I got to it pretty quick. And so what I ended up with was a small to medium cluster, a very, very weak hive. And yet I saw the queen, and she was trying, and they were trying, but they were just suffering quite a bit. So I could have done two things. I could have taken, you know, some brood from another hive and put it in there. But what I elected to do, and I'll let you know how it worked out, I switched another hive. I switched the hive stand. Put the weak one on this one,
Yeah.
this one there. And it was quite interesting because the foragers were out, and they were bringing in pollen. And so I really mixed them up. In fact, the foragers were coming into the new wheat colony, and they were going in and going out, and they were like almost shaking their head. Hey, what's going on here? And it took them about an hour before they figured it out.
they'll sort it out. Some of them will go there
Yeah.
and supplement. So you're on the right track, right? I like what you said, and I'm gonna use that to my advantage. What do you do here? What do you do here? First part is you could leave them big, they're medium, they have some stores, and the nectar flows right around the corner. This is gonna work, right? In your case, you had an artificial means by which this hive was impacted. Why wasn't this thing booming when it came out? What happened? So check on the queen. When the pattern analyzed, is your queen tired, worn out? Did you not do your treatment right? Consider requeening, leave them be until they're in that big situation that the first scenario was. But why are they in this situation? Did you not treat well? And they just eat themselves out? Did you not feed enough? Did they get robbed at some point? There has to be a reason. Was the queen just not a great performer? You're kind of looking at all these things and saying, if there's a means to correct this situation this fall, in preparation for the next overwinter, you're gonna look at those options.
So there's one other thing you could do is if it's a small cluster and you don't like the pattern, you could combine it with another hive. Right? If you had two of them that were weak, you could put the two together and hopefully get one good one out of two weak hives.
You could feed this hive, by the way. This is a hive you could feed. If it was on the smaller side and you wanted to make it go, you know, what's funny is that some queens, this should not be perceived as this was a bad thing. I don't want to give that connotation. Some queens and colonies just contract. That's what they do for a living. Why be huge over winter, right? And then coming out of spring, they roar to a full size quickly. You look at a hive one week and look the next week and where they all come from, right? So this is not necessarily a bad thing. But I do want you to focus on how old is your queen and how good is her pattern. And if it's a queen problem, a fresh queen fixes a lot of problems. Okay? Yeah.
How do you figure out the age of queen? I mean,
Yeah.
what's a good, you know, like all, no, I'm not gonna go there. But, you know, is there an age thing?
You mark her.
If you don't mark them, you don't know.
How do you mark them?
You mark them with a, well, there's a
We'll
lot
do a
of.
demo next week, right?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I just watched one. Again, I'm a big proponent of Michael Palmer. Michael Palmer says your queens have built-in handles on them.
Yeah.
And what he does, he just picks them up by the wings. So you're not touching the abdomen, you're not hurting them. Then he takes them over their head like this, and he holds them. He takes a little piece of grass or straw, he dips it into his tester's paint, or whatever the right color is, and he just puts a dab on it. So that's one way. You can just pick them up and paint them. I haven't done that yet.
White out?
But I have.
With the brood all around, I mean,
What?
it's
The
not
other
that
thing
bad,
is,
okay.
they sell all kinds of little contraptions, so they sell a little plastic tube, and it's got a plunger. Okay, it's got mesh over one end, and it's got a plunger with some, foam on it. So you can get the queen, you put her in there, you push the plunger up to hold her up against that screen at the top, and you dab a little paint on her. You take it down, you let her stay in there for a while till the paint dries.
And you
That's
put
how
it
you
back
can mark
in, between the comb, not
What-
just.
what you wanna do, if you never marked the queen, mark some drones. Take some drones out and practice. Practice picking up a drone, right? You wanna learn how to pick up a queen, pick up some drones, see how you do.
Get a paint pen for the proper color for the year.
Yeah.
Last year it was red, this year's green or blue, I don't know.
Yeah, it's usually a solvent-based paint is what it is, right? It's usually not a water-based, but it doesn't seem to bother them. And the other thing is, you don't have to smear it all over. You just need a little spot, you know? Don't have to be all over.
It's on the head though, right? I mean, you don't.
No, it's on the.
Two resources for you.
Okay.
Two resources. Go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/NWNJBA. There's two videos in there. One is Bob had the tube thing with the mesh.
Mm-hmm.
And I filmed him marking one of the mentoring queens last year, so you could watch literally how that thing worked. And then in there is a great video by Landy Simone, and
Forget now.
who was the other woman? There was another woman there.
Haven't watched it in a while.
The queen, anyway, there was another person, Mary Kaczynski.
Okay.
Wow. And they literally went through a scenario at an NJBA meeting where they showed picking up the drones and marking them and talking about the dynamic and how you mark them. And, you know, they recommended you pick up with the left hand and then you transfer it to the right hand. Or so, one of those things. Go watch the video, it's good. They explain how to do it. And in that, Landy Simone is a master beekeeper from North New Jersey and speaks frequently on different bee topics, and she did this one in particular. And there is you can look it up, Universal Queen Marking Guide. Now, ideally, you start with a new hive and you mark your queens. And you come back, and when you do your inspections, one, they pop right off the frame. And two, if the queen is ever replaced, you'll know it. What you won't know is when she was replaced. And then if she's replaced, you go in and you mark her again. And you have your notes as to, I found my queen was missing and they replaced her for some reason and now there's a new one. Or you scrupulously go through your hive and you find out that there's actually two of them, because that happens sometimes, right?
So the other thing is sometimes the bees will eat the mark off of her.
Yeah.
So I've marked the queen 3 times because they chew it all off. Now, they won't chew all of it off, so you'll still see a little. You'll pick them up and you go, wow, look at that, they cleaned up most of it. And you'll dab her again, come back in a couple weeks and hope that it's still there, it may not be. Other queens I marked and a year later, they're still marked, so.
I read online this morning on a forum that in Massachusetts, 80% of the beekeepers are reporting their hives died. Only 20% survival this year. I don't know if that's true or somebody, whatever, but what do you do when you have a dead hive?
Eat the honey.
You eat the honey
Start over.
and hope you don't turn blue.
So if you don't eat the honey, you can save the honey. It's a good resource to feed
Yeah.
back to the bees, right?
You could eat the honey though. You could save the honey.
I'm using, if it's good frames, I'm flipping out my old black frames and using that.
Yeah, you're using this. So you would distribute it across, or you could do another thing, which is put bees in it. Now, what are you looking for here?
But aren't you going to worry what made it die?
Ding.
There you go, bing, bing.
You should really understand why this hive died. Now, if you listen to the state
You
apiarist,
need to understand
Yeah.
why it died.
the state apiarist will tell you the largest percentage of hives in New Jersey die because of varroa mite and lack of proper treatment. The secondary cause of death for hives in New Jersey is starvation. There were only 6 American foulbrood cases, I think was the quote. So you're not gonna see rampant American foulbrood. If you got chalk brood or EFB or some of these other things, mold, you're generally okay putting bees back in, not American foulbrood. American foul brood, there's a video up on the YouTube channel that shows you how to test or look for that. Ideally, you take something like a toothpick, you put it in, you swirl it around to the goo that was the larvae, and if you pull it out, it ropes like snot. You have American foul brood. Call the apiary inspector or call us. Okay? If you know something went wrong, they didn't feed them right, they got robbed, they didn't treat for varroa, and you find a cluster where the bees are heading, their tails are sticking out, there's a small little comb of that, and the bees are hanging on, and they're all dead, chances are you had a starvation or a varroa mite infestation that caused the decline. Okay? Yeah.
Question, if you were fairly sure that the bees died because of varroa,
Yeah.
would it be acceptable to put a new package in the spring in the same hive?
Yes.
And then treat for varroa, put some apistan in or?
Yeah,
because
because you
the varroa
load new
would not
bees
take-
into that, it's the general, yes, you can, and that's, you know, you could load them right in, they have comb, they have pollen, they have honey. You know, there is an aspect that could be a pesticide kill. There's other signs that usually show up that you know that, right?
The answer to that question is the varroa overwinter in the cluster with the bees.
Yeah.
So when the bees die,
They
there's no
die.
more
They did
bee
too.
in there, guess what? The varroa are dead, they just killed
Yeah, it's a
themselves.
good point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Typically, a lot of times what happens when you go into your hive and you see that small cluster and it's dead, and you see that the honey is eating around it, what happens a lot of times is you don't have good, healthy young bees going into the fall. So as the older bees die, there's no long-lived young bees to live through the winter. And what will happen is your hive will die at the end of January, right? If your hive dies at the end of January, you got a small cluster, it's usually because the cluster has dwindled, okay, to a point where, number one, it either can't move to where the honey is, and it's starved, or it just dwindled to the point where it can't generate enough heat to stay warm. Okay, but in my experience, those hives that die from varroa, a lot of times it's at the end of January, because that's when all of your adult bees have died and you don't have enough young bees to either keep the cluster warm or to allow the cluster to move to where the food is.
So let's say you buy hives and you have no idea what the condition was, or you're risk averse. You're not sure you want to spend $100 on a package and put them in there and risk that. Get rid of the comb, and or cut out anything that was brood related, comb, and put new foundation in and load the bees in. You could use the equipment. The only time you should never use the equipment over again is when you had American foul brood. And even that context, they'll tell you get rid of all the frames and so on, and you'd have to do something to irradiate or scorch to get rid of the American foul brood.
So-
Most people just burn them outright if it's American foul brood situation. Yeah.
If you had a dead out, what about the hive beetle? Will they survive?
If there's no active life in there, the hive beetle, the varroa, the only thing that will come eventually when it gets warm is the wax moth. They'll love that. They'll clean it up for you. They're nature's cleanup crew.
Yeah,
They'll come get all that wax. And you should be looking at your bottom boards right now. If you have trays, pulling them out, cleaning them off, inspecting them, and check. Last year when I did this, I pulled it out and there were wax moths eating all the wax on the bottom of the, they weren't in the hive, but they were eating all the wax off the bottom of the tray. So,
Just to go back to foul brood real quick, especially for the new beekeepers, well, how will I know I have it? I haven't seen it. It has a distinctive odor. If you open up the hive and it has a foul odor, that's a warning flag. That's something to look at. So go in your hive, know what a good healthy hive smells like, right? And if you get a foul odor out of your hive, that raises the red flag. So that's probably the best way for someone who's never seen it to at least consider the fact that they might have it before doing the odor test.
if your hive is dead, close it until you have a chance to do your post-mortem. Don't leave it open, because if something was bad there, all your other bees are gonna get flying and they'll get in there and you'll kill the rest of your hives. So, last thing to say about this, right? Ensure no disease, add new bees, or disperse the resources to other hives or whatever you're gonna do with it. figure out what went wrong. Don't just, it's dead, put new bees in and keep going, that's treadmill, and that doesn't make any sense. And make corrections in your program. So if it's one of the two major things, varroa, or you didn't feed them right, you better figure out what you could do next spring, or you're gonna be in the same situation. Anything else? Small cluster, minimal stores. Talking teacup size, still in there, what do you do?
Feed 'em.
Feed them, option.
Combine.
Combine them with another hive, option.
Requeen.
Requeen, option. What else?
Just disperse them in the yard.
Shake them out in the yard, yep. What happens when you shake them out in the yard?
They'll find a place to go.
They'll find a place to go. Maybe not the place, but the rest of them will go somewhere. Watch the queen pattern. If it's okay, maybe something caused this hive to be that small. I had a hive that Bob gave me last year was, from the mentoring, it was this big. Maybe not even. You could have held the whole thing, and by July, it filled 4 boxes. I have heard time and time again, for whatever reason, that these hives tend to make some of the biggest, strongest clusters. Now, commercial people will tell you, get rid of it. Not worth your time. You're a backyard beekeeper, if you've got the equipment, maybe you want to give it a roll. My hypothesis is, you have a small queen and colony, and there's no parasites in there. There's no bad news. And if given the chance to eat and prosper, they will go. They have no baggage, right? And maybe that's why they blow up, right? I think Michael Palmer said one of his strongest hives came from one of these things at one point. Last year when we were at NWNJBA.
Did
Yeah.
you change the queen?
You could change the queen. I mean, look, if you have a handful of bees, you're better off just shaking them out, right? Or give them a cow. Put them in a nuke box and see what happens. So, watch the queen pattern and look. So if the queen starts to develop, and you're looking at the pattern and it really stinks, you know why it was small. Get rid of the queen, give them a new one.
So Kevin, that was a good point. You know, you might want to downsize these guys if it's that small, right? Put them into a nuke. Put whatever resources you can in there. Again, like we talked before, pollen, frame of honey, empty frame or two, but you might want to put them in a smaller box because they don't need all that space.
The first place to always look is within. You know, did you do something wrong? Can you make correction?
Okay, I'm good with this, I'm getting my bees next week. The queen pattern, is that what you're saying? Is it just like their eggs and cells that are close together, because you're talking about they're like spread apart?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a queen should be laying, a queen does this in a funny way. She'll lay over here, and she'll lay over here, she'll lay over here, she'll lay over here, but then she'll go back over here, 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 here. She has a defined circle,
Oh, so they
sphere.
are patterned.
She'll lay all over the place, but when she's done, that thing should be all tight together, all the frames, all the face of the frame should, there shouldn't be
So what's a bad queen pattern?
one over here, big hole, one over here, you know, individual things. You know, when you look at it, it looks like they describe it as a carpet of bees, right? The covering over top of the entire brood face is solid all the way through. If it looks like pin cushions all the way, there's something wrong with your queen, she's not right.
They call it spotty, so that kind of says it, right? If you've got
Yeah.
a lot of spots and it's not a nice full pattern, that's a problem. Even a full pattern is gonna have a couple of empty cells here and there. The other thing to look for is sometimes the queen won't lay in a cell that's got a wire through it or behind it. So sometimes you'll look at a beautiful pattern and you'll see this V where she hasn't laid, and that's because of the wire that's in there. Either the cell's not deep enough or for whatever reason she didn't like it.
What do you do with the original queen then, kill her? I mean, or,
If your pattern is
Yeah.
bad and she's not, yeah, you'll buy a new queen, you'll pinch her off, you'll put a new one in.
Don't throw away. Put her in a little bit of alcohol in a jar. You can use her as a swarm lure. I got a jar full of queens.
swarms like alcohol?
Huh? Yeah, you can put them in alcohol, regular isopropyl alcohol.
I think this is the last
Ethanol will
scenario.
probably be better.
and following the time, we'll roll through here. Cluster is up under the lid. They have minor stores to each side of them. The cluster is a reasonable size. They have drawn comb below.
Feed.
This is a reversal, right? This is a typical reversal. And one of the questions is, why isn't there a honey dome? Some, again, make corrections this summer, right? Watch a queen pattern. Why are they small and in this thing? A good queen creates industrious bees who has good pollen and nectar practices, and the patterns are great. A mediocre queen doesn't do that. So could this be the sign of a mediocre queen? It could be, right? So look at the patterns and look at and make your correction. It's still cold, folks. Remember, we're 2 weeks behind. Don't go home today if it's 45 degrees and be holding your brood up in the air. You're chilling them, okay? Thanks to the cartoonist who made this. Merrick Spring Guide. This emphasizes a point, right? Be careful not to chew the brood, chill the brood. Temperatures above 50, you can do incidental looks. Don't be holding them up. When it's above 60, you can actually start pulling frames and doing all that. I still say to you that while you might find it refreshing, the equivalent to us is we keep our house, 65, 70 degrees? Go open it when it's 30 degrees out. You will feel the chill. So will that. Every time you take the lid off, feel that whoosh of hot air going out. They worked very hard to do that. Some say every time you open the hive, you're emptying 2 days worth of hot air that they have to put back in, and you're wrecking your ecosystem of humidity and all the other things.
They're also not happy.
They don't.
They come at you.
They're in there.
That's true, even when you just lift the lid.
Yeah, they'll let you know.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, so, this time of year, be judicious. You want to get to 70 degrees, 65, 70 degrees and full sun on that hive in the middle of the afternoon when the day is warmed and the boxes go in
I
there.
think the idea is, know what you're going in there for, right? Have a plan before you go in. Why am I opening it up? What am I looking for? Am I looking for the brood pattern? Looking for the queen? What am I going in there for? And then just go in, do what you have to do, and get out.
We'll do housekeeping here at the end, but do you want to just offer to people want to stay? Did you get the tour?
No.
No, okay. We were going to try and see if everybody wanted to see a hive tracks demo, but we don't have online in here. So,
Can't get it through my
couple of notes. Roger brought this. It's a spreadsheet that he uses for tracking his hives. We'll get a copy of that in electronic format and post it up. There is a hive inspection form also up on our website. Go look at our YouTube channel and just meander. If you've never seen it, there's a lot. We film everything we do, pretty much. So you could go and get it introduced for the splits meeting by watching last year's splits meeting. Just get some of the concepts down. You'll have seen it, and then you'll get to experience it if you've never done that before. Roger brought some bee culture magazines. If you've never seen that, great publication. He's got some back issues. You could take one of those if you want to see what that looks like. Our next meeting is April 26th.
Saturday.
What time?
Earth Day is going on at the Deer Path Park, okay? At the same time, we're having our meeting, which is a 10 o'clock opening, I think?
Yes.
Same as this, 10 o'clock on a Saturday, 10 to 12, or something like that. It's up on the website, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure that would be the time frame.
Where's the meeting, here or?
It's at Deer Path.
What is it, Deer Path?
Yeah. So, Deer Path is
Across from the YMCA.
by the YMCA off of Deer Path Road, just down the highway off of Route 31. We'll have instructions on our site, a map. It's gonna be too wet, likely, for us to drive our vehicles up into the mentoring hives, which sit in the back of the field over by Round Mountain. So you're gonna have to park and walk in, and you wanna wear boots, because it's gonna be muddy. Bring your gear, because we're gonna have live bees, okay? And our Facebook page is out there. If you have questions, please make it a community. ask your question. I'd love to see that go this year. It's been kind of like, here's the meeting, here's the thing, here's a little something about beekeeping out in the industry, news and whatever. You could use it to ask your questions. And I don't know, how many people here are not on Facebook?
Not going.
Not?
No.
Wow.
Not
All right,
going.
I guess we're out of luck. Well,
Old school, Kev.
let me,
Another way we can access it?
let me offer an alter. Roger has a forum on Yahoo. If you're just not computer,
No, I'm
I
proud of
can't help you.
it. I'm proud of it.
Well, here's the thing about the Facebook page, it's public. You don't, I don't know if do you need to sign in?
All you have to do, my Facebook account has my name,
Yeah.
it has my email address, and that's it. And that allows me to get into Facebook to look at all of this stuff. So that's all the information you need in order to create an account, in order to be able to go in and look at all this stuff. You don't have to give
Make
away all the
yourself
family
Bob or Mary
secrets.
Beekeeper. Who cares?
You don't get unwanted advertising or anything?
No, you
No.
can get a free email address and just use that.
You can lie and give yourself a new name, a new
Yeah.
email address, and just to get access to it.
Yeah.
Roger has a Yahoo forum that's been out there forever. If you go to our homepage, on our website, how many don't know what our website is? Anybody?
Can't you get all this stuff through your website?
I was
No,
gonna
you
say,
could go directly there,
why
but,
can't, yeah, can't
but
you
if
just
you
put it on the
don't know
website?
what it is, we have it, but we're not.
Facebook's for chatting.
Facebook is a dialogue thing. It's really difficult to build
Group email.
a forum type thing on a website. You might as well use tools, but this is where I'm going. Go to our homepage. On the upper right-hand corner, there's a link for a forum. You can go to Roger's forum, which is the same thing. It actually predates our Facebook page. And he has beekeepers from all over playing in that space. So you could put things in knowledgeable beekeepers from all over come in there and post, right? You'll have to join Yahoo or use your email account, but it's not Facebook. So if that's what the opposition is, that's a very active and vital forum to use also to ask your questions. And Bob and I are in there too, so.
And once you sign on to that, you can set it so the messages can go to your email. And you can reply or read to them those messages without even going on the site anymore.
Facebook does the same thing, yep. Yeah. Yes,
Does anybody know anything about LinkedIn?
yes.
As I understand it, that's kind of a forum set up for people with common interests, knowledge.
It's more professional stuff.
Yeah, business.
Like,
It's not very.
And that's the same way with Meetup.
It's professional.
You get a lot of trash and that's it.
So the other thing I'll tell you is not self-promotion, but self-promotion. I do a beekeeping podcast, and I have a lot of information for getting started in beekeeping. You're gonna get asked as a beekeeper right now, how do I get started in this as you go out? As a beekeeper, you'll develop your repertoire of what you tell people in the pub. How do bees overwinter? How many of you got asked that question? Yeah, right? So you'll start to learn your little elevator speech for all these things. And one of them is, how do I get started in beekeeper? And you could stand here and talk to each individual that asked you over the next 6 months. Or if you'd like, you can go to my site and put up a full-blown, I wrote out what my answer is, and now I say, I have this guide, just go there and read the thing. It's in audio format, I recorded it, and I also have a PDF that you could read. It's bkcorner.org, and all my past podcasts are there, whatever. If you want to look at the other topics. That's how Bob and I know all this stuff, is we contribute routinely there.
Can you write that address you just said? What was it?
Sure, BK,
Yeah.
corner, the letter B, the letter K, corner.org.
Okay.
And you could go and look at my show notes. Every topic that I ever talk about is in there indexed. So if you want to pull the episode down and you only want to hear this, you could say, listen from 1915 to 27, whatever. And I record every 2 to 3 weeks, so, and I've covered so many topics. Anything, Bob, you want to add?
That's all I have. I want to show you hive tracks one of these days, as soon as I can get an internet connection in here or somewhere, we'll do that. But you know what, you can always also go out yourself too, www.hivetracks.com. And you just have to set up an account for a free account, and it's easy enough that you can just find your way through. You create your yards, you create your hives, and you do inspections. That's the gist of it, and it records all of it there. And there's a lot of other stuff, but that's the basics of it.
We have one other reminder to give you as a public service announcement from Charlie and Karen, and from MIM is about the membership committee. Everybody should have renewed their membership by now. If you haven't, please make sure you reach out and take care of that. We're also looking at revising, at the most recent state meeting, they revised the state bylaws. And so now what we're gonna do is take their body of work and look at our bylaws and see what needs to be revised so we're harmonious with them. We're looking for help, assistance, just incidental help here and there on a bunch of different things. So Bob's got a lot of events coming up. We have things like this bylaws committee and membership committee, public relations. If you have any background in those things, please come see us. We could use the help. Get engaged in that way. Anything else that Karen
Yeah,
or?
even if you don't have experience.
Even if you don't, we'll guide you through. You know, there'll be time for officers by the end of this year to come in and help the club. And if you, this is another, if you have topics that you want to come up here and give to the membership, we'd really welcome that too. Or if you want to come with us, we did the presentation, we can guide you through it, you can come up here and help us with it. I know a lot of people don't like public speaking, but there's some of you that can handle that, so. I don't know how much you want to hear us up here yakking all the time, so. You're free to go, I guess, right? If you have questions and want to hang out and ask, you feel free, and please talk amongst each other, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.